The rabbit was still warm when Eloan found it on her windowsill, laid out neat as an offering, its fur combed the wrong way by careful teeth. Third one this week. She leaned out into the frost-bitten morning, breath steaming, and scanned the tree line where a massive black wolf stood absolutely still between two birches, pretending very hard to be a shadow. That wolf was Cassian Thornmere, Alpha King of the Nine Packs, terror of the northern border, a man who had once ended a war with a single sentence. He had been leaving her rabbits for 11 days. He had told his beta it was foxes. He had meant to visit her window once, just once, out of curiosity. He had been wrong about that, and about several things since. Eloan picked up the rabbit by its hind legs and squinted at the tree line. "I can see you," she called. "You're the size of a hay cart. You are not hidden." The shadow between the birches did not move. In the deep, cold engine of his chest, the king's human mind said, "She cannot possibly see us." And his wolf said, "She sees us. She's looking at us. This is the best moment of our life. Hold still though it lasts longer. Thank you for the rabbit," she said, because her mother had raised her to have manners even before her pack had decided she wasn't worth keeping. "But if you're going to court my window, you could at least come get warm. I've a fire. I won't tell anyone a big, frightening forest beast sat on a hearth rug like a house dog. I am the Alpha King," he thought. "I have a war council in 3 hours. I have not slept in my own bed in 4 days because it does not smell of lavender and rendered tallow and her. I am leaving. I am absolutely leaving." He walked to her door. This is the story of how the most feared man on the continent lost a months-long argument with his own wolf, and how a border omega with chapped hands and no pack to her name brought a kingdom to its knees without ever raising her voice. He meant to stay one night. Listen to how wrong he was. Eloan Marsh lived in the last cottage before the wild, the one the Black Pine pack gave to people it wanted to forget. She was 23, an omega with a scent the pack matrons had called thin, which was their polite word for worthless, and after her father died coughing in the grey spring 2 years back, the council had moved her out to the border the way you'd move a chipped cup to the back of the shelf. Officially, she was the pack's tallow renderer. She boiled down fat from the autumn slaughter into candles and soap, work that left her smelling of grease and wood smoke, which was why she grew lavender in every pot, every window box, every cracked boot she could fill with dirt. Lavender on her wrists. Lavender in her wash water. Lavender hung upside down from the rafters in bunches, so the whole crooked little cottage breathed it out through the chimney like a secret. Unofficially, she was the person you brought broken things to. A hawk with a snapped wing feather. A hound the hunters were going to drown because its leg healed wrong. A hedgehog, once, that a child carried 3 miles in a hat. She set bones with birch splints and fed medicine off her own spoon, and she never asked what would be paid because she knew the answer and had made her peace with it. So when the enormous black wolf had first appeared at her fence 12 days ago, limping, holding his left forepaw, an inch off the ground with an expression of profound tragedy, she had done what she always did. She had propped the gate open with a brick and gone inside to warm broth. Here is what actually happened to that paw, and the king would have died before admitting it. Cassian Thornmere had been running the border in wolf form, alone, the way he did when the council chambers got too loud in his skull, and he had caught a thread of lavender on the wind and followed it, And while staring at a small Omega woman hanging laundry in the blue dusk, he had stepped in her cabbage trench like an idiot. The limp was real for perhaps a minute. The tragic expression he kept, because it was working. She had knelt in the frozen mud in front of an animal that outweighed her 3 times over. An animal with jaws that could crack a bull's leg. And she'd taken his paw in both her small, work-roughened hands and pressed her thumbs along the bones, frowning with her whole face. "Nothing broken," she'd said. "You big fraud." His wolf had fallen irreversibly in love somewhere in the middle of that sentence. His human half took until the broth, because she'd fed him. From her own pot, which he later understood was most of her supper, in a dented tin bowl with a rooster stamped on the bottom. And she'd sat on her step in the cold, with her arms wrapped around her knees, and talked to him while he ate. Not baby talk. Not the cooing people did at dogs. She talked to him like a person who happened to be furry, told him the hawk in the mews was healing crooked, and it worried her, told him the pack had shorted her tallow ration again, and winter was coming down off the mountains early, told him he had burrs behind his left ear, and if he came back tomorrow, she'd get them out, no charge. He had a war council the next morning. He sat through reports of grain stores and troop movements, and heard none of it, because his wolf was pacing the inside of his ribs, chanting burrs, burrs, she is going to touch our ears, and at dusk the alpha king of the 9 packs told his beta he was going to inspect the border alone again, and ran 9 miles through the snow to sit on a poor woman's step and have burrs combed out of his fur with her fingers. That was how it started. This is how it escalated. The rabbits began on the 3rd night, because his wolf had done the arithmetic of her pantry, 1 sack of oats, a bin of stunted potatoes, a single string of onions, and reached a conclusion of pure, ancient instinct. Our Omega is thin. We will fix this. Cassian woke from a doze by his own fire, to find himself already at the door with his boots off and his shirt half over his head, and thought, no, we are not hunting for her. That is a courting gift. That is a declaration. We are the king. We do not leave dead rabbits on windowsills like some moonstruck yearling. He left the rabbit on her windowsill at dawn, arranged so she'd see it first thing, and hid behind 2 birch trees to watch her find it. And when she smiled, actually pressed her hand to her mouth, and smiled, his wolf howled in triumph so loudly inside him that he had a headache until noon. His beta, a dry, grey-eyed man named Ro, who had survived 3 wars and had not expected this to be the thing that broke him, noticed the pattern by day 5. "Sire, there are rabbit bones in the courtyard again. The kitchen staff say you've taken up snaring." "Foxes," said the king, not looking up from his maps. "Foxes. There's a den by the east wall. Vicious things, leave it." Ro looked at his king, a man he had watched execute a traitor without changing expression, and observed that there was a long lavender-grey thread caught in the royal beard. "Of course, sire," he said. "Foxes." The shawl was day 8. Eloan had washed it in lavender water and hung it on the line, and the wolf had stood beneath it for a long time in the dark. And the human mind inside him had said very firmly, "Do not. We have dignity. We have a throne." And then the wind had swung the shawl against his muzzle, warm wool and her scent, and a ghost of wood smoke. And the argument was over. He carried it home 9 miles in his teeth like a soldier carrying a flag, and he slept with it under his head. And in the morning, he could not for the life of him figure out how to give it back without explaining anything. So he simply kept it, and felt guilty, and left her 2 rabbits and a pheasant. "Sire," said Ro, Why is there a woman's shawl on your pillow? Evidence, said the king. From the border. There may be a spy. Shall I have it examined? Touch it, and I'll have your hands. The foxes again, I expect, said Roe, and left before his face could betray him. The bath was day 15, and the bath was, both halves of Cassian agreed afterward, entirely her fault. It had rained for 2 days, the cold grey rain that turns border country to soup, and he had arrived at her gate looking less like the terror of the north and more like something dredged out of a bog, mud to the shoulder, a crown of dead leaves plastered behind one ear. Elawan had taken one look at him from the doorway, sighed the sigh of a woman who has raised many patients, and said, "Absolutely not. Not on my hearth rug. Stay." And he had stayed. That was the thing that kept astonishing him. Later. She said stay, and the Alpha King, whose own counsel flinched when he shifted in his chair, stood dripping in the yard while a woman he could carry under one arm heated water in a copper kettle and dragged out a wooden washtub meant for laundry, and then he had folded himself into it, knees under his chin, enormous and ridiculous, while she rolled her sleeves to the elbow and scrubbed mud out of his ruff with lye soap, and talked. Her hands worked through his fur in slow, strong circles. Warm water ran down his spine. She hummed when she worked, off-key, some hearth song with half the words missing, and she found the old scar over his left eye, the one a rogue's knife had given him at 19, and traced it once with her thumb, gently, the way you'd touch a crack in something you were fond of. "Someone hurt you once," she said. "Bet they regretted it." They did not live to regret it, thought the king, boneless in a laundry tub. And his wolf thought nothing at all, because his wolf had achieved a state of perfect happiness, known only to well-scrubbed animals, and was making a sound, and a low, ruinous, rumbling sound. "Are you purring?" Elawan laughed, delighted, water dripping off her chin. "Wolves don't purr. What are you?" "You have no idea," he thought, and purred louder. Roe that night to the captain of the guard. "Do not ask him why he smells of lavender soap. Do not look at him if he says the word foxes. Agree." The bed was day 20, and the bed he genuinely had not planned. A storm came down off the mountains like a fist, the kind that kills travelers, and he had been at her window when it hit, and she had hauled the door open against the wind and shouted, "In, now!" And then, because her cottage had exactly one room, and the fire was small and the storm screamed in the chimney all night, she had dragged her quilts off the bed onto the floor by the hearth, and slept curled against his flank, with her cold feet tucked into his fur, and her fist wrapped in his ruff like a child holding a rope. He lay awake most of the night, still as a king lying in state, listening to her heartbeat slow into sleep, feeling each of her breaths stir the fur at his shoulder, and had the longest and most honest conversation with himself that he'd had in 10 years. It went, in the end, quite simply. His wolf said, "This is our mate." It said it without ceremony, the way you'd say the sky is up. And his human half, who had spent a decade letting the council parade lunar candidates past him like horses at a fair, who had a short list and a treaty implication for every name on it, looked at a tallow renderer's chapped knuckles buried in his fur, and found he had no argument left anywhere in him. "I have to tell her," he thought. "Tomorrow," said his wolf comfortably, and went to sleep. He said tomorrow for 5 more weeks. You should understand what those weeks were, because she came to depend on them the way you depend on a stare you no longer look at. The wolf came at dusk most days. He carried her firewood sledge rope in his teeth going up the hill so the load pulled lighter. He sat outside the mews, making the crooked-winged hawk furiously nervous, which she swore was the only exercise it got. He ate a rabbit she cooked for him, which meant that at some point Eloan Marsh roasted the Alpha King's own courting gift with wild garlic and fed it back to him in the rooster bowl. And he ate every scrap, and his wolf considered this the finest diplomacy of his reign. And she talked. That was the heart of it. She told the wolf things she had never said aloud to a living soul, because who would she have said them to? And a wolf keeps secrets. She told him about the day the council moved her to the border, how nobody had argued. That was the part she circled back to, picking at it like a splinter. Not that they'd been cruel, they hadn't. Everyone had been very reasonable. Someone had even helped carry her father's chair. Just that in a whole pack, not one voice had said, "She stays." "I used to think if I was useful enough," she said one evening, her cheek against his shoulder, watching the fire. "If I set enough bones and made enough candles." Somebody would notice and say, "Oh, her, we should bring her back in." That's not how it works, though. You don't get chosen for being useful. You get used for it. She scratched behind his ear absently. "You chose me, though, didn't you? Out of all the windowsills on the border." She laughed a little at herself. "Listen to me." Confiding in a wolf. Inside the wolf. The king was quiet for a long time. Then he thought, with a clarity that frightened him, "I am going to burn that council to the waterline," and closer to the bone, she was never unchosen. They simply hadn't found her yet. I hadn't found her yet. Tomorrow, he told himself. His wolf, for once, didn't tease. His wolf just moved so that more of her weight rested on him. Then Tam started coming around, and the tomorrows ran out. Tam was a hunter's son. 25, wide shoulders, good teeth, an easy way with a laugh. He had begun appearing at Eloan's gate with split firewood he swore was extra, then with a brace of grouse, then with no pretext at all, leaning on her fence with the low sun behind him. And he was. This was the intolerable part, genuinely kind. The wolf, watching from the tree line, could find nothing wrong with him. His human half tried its very best. He stacks the wood badly. His grouse are scrawny. His scent is agreeable in a way I resent. "You ought to come to the solstice fire this year," Tam said one evening, turning his cap in his hands. "In the village proper. It's not right you out here alone. I'd walk you." "That's kind," said Eloan, in the careful voice of a woman who has learned kindness usually has a bill attached. "I mean it, and well." Tam's ears went red. "I'd be proud to walk you, is what I mean." "In the trees," a sound began, so low it registered first in the soles of Tam's boots. A growl, like a mountain, deciding something. Tam went home early. In the morning, his boots, which he'd left on his own step to dry, were gone. They were found 3 days later at the top of a pine tree, 40 feet up, placed neatly side by side. "Foxes," said the king, when Roe read him the border report with a face like a headstone. "Foxes carried a grown man's boots up a pine tree. They're an ambitious den, sire." Roe set the report down. He had known Cassian since they were boys, since before the crown, and he took the one liberty a lifetime buys. "Whoever she is, marry her before you start on the poor lad's roof." And Cassian, king of 9 packs, put his head in his hands at his own war table and said quietly, "She talks to the wolf, Roe. She tells the wolf everything. If the man walks in and says it was me, it was always me, I've been in your laundry tub, then every true thing she ever said by that fire, she said it to a lie. I've built the only room where she's honest, and I can't come inside without knocking it down." Roe was silent a moment. Then he said, "The council announces the lunar selection at the solstice fire. Elder Voren has the votes for Lady Maren. You're out of tomorrow's, sire, foxes or no." I was more out of tomorrow's than either of them knew, because Elder Voren had a border report of his own. Voren was old iron, a broad grey alpha who had served 3 kings, and he had noticed what betas notice and kings think is hidden: the mud, the lavender, the royal runs east at dusk. He had ridden the border himself, seen the cottage, seen the woman, and understood with total clarity what was about to happen to 10 years of his careful treaty work. And here is the truth about Voren, the truth that made him worse than a monster, which is that he was not one. 40 years ago, Voren had been a border boy himself, hungry in a cottage like that one, and he had clawed his way to the council table by learning exactly one lesson: that the pack survives on order and dies on sentiment. He stood at her fence line at dusk, unseen, and watched Aloan laugh with a hawk on her glove. And for one long moment, his face was not hard at all. She looked like his sister had looked, before the famine winter took her, laughing at nothing in the cold. Then he closed that door in himself, the way he had closed it for 40 years, and told himself what he always told himself: one woman, or the peace of 9 packs. It isn't cruelty if you grieve it. He didn't send killers. He was careful even in this. He sent word through 3 cutouts to a rogue band wintering in the caves, and the word was only this: there is an unprotected cottage on the east border. Frighten the woman off it. Burn it if she's stubborn. No blood. As if rogues had ever in the world stopped where they were told. They came on the night of the first true snow. Aloan was in the yard, latching the mews, snow settling on her shoulders, when the hens went silent all at once, which is the sound the border teaches you to fear more than screaming. Then they came over her fence, 4 of them, wolves gone wrong, rib-sprung and yellow-eyed, and there was nowhere to run that mattered. She did the only thing she had. She put her back against the mew's door, because the hawk was inside and it couldn't fly yet, and she picked up the firewood axe, and her hands were shaking so hard the head of it chattered against the gate-post, and she thought, with a strange calm underneath the terror, at least the wolf isn't here. At least they won't hurt him. The first rogue gathered itself and leapt. It did not land. Something hit it out of the air like the fist of God, a black shape that came over the fence without seeming to touch it, and the sound that followed was not a wolf sound at all. It was a pronouncement, a roar that cracked across the yard with an alpha's full dominance behind it, and 3 rogues went flat to the snow on their bellies before they could think. The 4th was young and stupid and came in low at Eloan's side, under the black wolf's guard, jaws open. And Cassian understood, in the time it takes a spark to cross a dark room, that he could not reach her in time. Not on 4 legs. But a man's arm is longer than a wolf's stride. I shifted mid-leap. The change tore through him, between one heartbeat and the next, fur to skin, the night air suddenly cold on human shoulders, and it was a man who slammed into the rogue's path, a man who took the raking claws across his forearm and closed his other hand on the rogue's throat and put it into the fence post hard enough to crack the wood. He stood over it, bleeding into the snow, 6 feet of scarred king in the falling white, and said in a voice that every wolf in a mile went still to hear, "She is under my protection. Carry that to every cave in the north. Touch her again, and there will be no north." The rogues ran. The snow came down. The yard was very, very quiet. Cassian turned around. Eloan stood with her back against the mew's door, the axe forgotten in her hands, looking at his face, at the scar over his left eye. The scar she had traced with her thumb once, gently, in a laundry tub full of grey water. "You purr," she said. Not a question. Not sire, not the Alpha King, not a scream. Just those 2 words, flat and small in the snowfall. And he watched her rebuild the last 2 months behind her eyes, brick by brick. The rabbits, the shawl, the storm, the fire, her cold feet in his fur, every secret she had ever fed into the dark of his listening. "Eloan." "I knelt in the mud," she said. Her voice didn't rise. That was the worst of it. "I checked your paw for breaks. I fed you my supper out of the rooster bowl. I told you." The axe head dipped and touched the snow. "I told you things I've never said out loud. About the council. About being left. And you sat there. The king. Warming his feet at the little Omega's fire, listening to her talk to an animal. And I suppose it was all very." She stopped. She looked away from him at the tree line and finished quietly. Was it funny? No. He didn't move toward her. He got that much right, at least. He stood bleeding in the snow with his arms at his sides and made no speeches at first. And then, because she deserved the whole ledger, he opened it. "It was never funny. It was the only place I could breathe. But you should have all of it. So, the rabbits were me. There were no foxes. There have never, at any point, been foxes. The shawl on your line, that was me. It's on my pillow. It has been on my pillow for 7 weeks. My beta thinks I've lost my mind. And he is right." Tam's boots, in the pine tree. Me. I have listened to you sing off key, and I know about the crooked hawk and the shorted tallow ration, which has been quietly corrected since midwinter's eve. That was also me. And every night for 5 weeks, I have stood at that tree line telling myself, tomorrow I knock on her door on 2 legs. And every night I was a coward, because on 4 legs you looked at me like I was worth something, and I could not bear to trade that for the way people look at a crown. The snow fell between them. Somewhere in the mews the hawk shuffled and settled. "You should be angry," he said. "Stay angry as long as you need. I'll bank the tree line in firewood, and you never have to open that gate to me again in either shape. But you asked the wolf a question once, by the fire. You asked, you chose me, didn't you, out of all the window sills on the border. And I have never answered a question more honestly in my life than he answered that one. So before I go, you'll hear it in a man's voice. Yes, you. Out of 9 packs and every court and council in the north, it was only ever going to be you." Eloan looked at him for a long time. The axe hung loose in her hand. When she finally spoke, her voice wobbled, and what it wobbled with, he realized with a shock like cold water, was not only fury. Some of it, God help him, was laughter, the kind that comes out crooked when a person is crying at the same time. "You absolute fraud," she said. "Your paw was never hurt. It was hurt for almost a full minute. I rationed my onions for you. I gave you the good quilt." She swiped her wrist across her eyes, furious about it. I'm so angry at you. I'm going to be angry at you for a long time. You'll have to be patient about it. He heard it before she did, maybe. The shape of that sentence. You'll have to be. Future tense. Something in his chest unlocked so hard it nearly buckled him. I have, said the Alpha King, an extraordinarily patient wolf. You have a shameless, thieving, boot-stealing wolf, she said. And then, because she was who she was, she looked at his forearm, and the red dripping off his fingers into the snow, and the healer in her shouldered past the heartbreak the way it always would. You're bleeding on my yard. Get inside. Sit on the rug. A beat. You know where it is. Oh, the solstice fire, 4 nights later, burned at the center of the Black Pine village, and the whole pack was gathered when the council rose to announce the lunar selection. Elder Voran stood in his grey furs with the treaty names in his hand, and Lady Maren stood beside the fire in white, beautiful and cold-eyed. 3 years of grooming for this hour. And the king came out of the dark at the crowd's edge, and he was not alone. He walked Eloan Marsh through that pack, through every matron who had called her scent thin, past every reasonable person who had helped carry her father's chair out to the border, and never once said she stays, and the silence spread ahead of them like frost on a window. She wore her own patched cloak. He had offered her finery, and she had refused it. And looking at her now, chin level, lavender in her buttonhole, he understood she'd been right. Let them see exactly what they threw away. Sire, Voran began, the council has prepared. The council, said Cassian, has hired rogues. The word went through the crowd like a blade. Voran did not flinch, old iron to the last, but his eyes closed. Once, slowly, and something in that hard old face said he had known, from the hour the rogues broke their leash, that this fire was coming for him. Cassian laid it out plainly, the cutouts, the cave band, the burned latch on a border gate, the confession Roe had extracted that morning, and he did not shout any of it, which made it worse. Then he stood at the fire's edge, with the light on his scarred face, and said the words the North still repeats. Hear me, Black Pine, and carry it to the 9. This woman was left on your border like a chipped cup, and she spent 2 years mending your hawks and your hounds and your children's hedgehogs, while not one of you said her name. I said it. I will say it every day I breathe. She is mine. My mate, my Luna, my queen, chosen not by treaty or council, but by the wolf who is honest, and the man who finally caught up. Kneel or don't. She was worth more than all of you the day you sent her away, and she is worth more than all of you tonight. The first to kneel, and no one who saw it ever quite agreed on why, was Lady Maren. She looked at Eloan for a long moment, across the fire, a border Omega in a patched cloak, standing where 3 years of Maren's ambition had planned to stand. And whatever moved behind her cold eyes, it wasn't only defeat. Perhaps she alone knew exactly what it cost to be groomed and traded like a treaty clause, and what it would mean to be chosen instead. She sank down into the snow with her white skirts pooling, and bowed her head, and the pack came down after her like a field under wind. Voran was not executed. Eloan asked for that herself, before the whole fire, and the pack heard their new Luna's first ruling. He was stripped of his seat and his furs, and sent to live in the last cottage before the wild, the one the pack gave to people it wanted to forget, with a tallow kettle and a winter's worth of rendering to do. Usefulness, Eloan said quietly when the sentence was read. isn't a punishment, but he can learn what it's like to be nothing else. They say the old man renders good candles now. They say some nights he leaves grain out for the foxes, the real ones, and stands at the window a long time, watching the tree line for nobody. Spring came late to the high country that year, but it came. On an evening in the thaw, the Queen of the 9 Packs sat on the step of a border cottage she now owned outright and refused to give up, the crooked-winged hawk flying at last, tracing lopsided circles over the birches. The yard smelled of wet earth and new lavender. The rooster bowl, dented, ancient, utterly unfit for a palace, sat by the door where it had always sat, licked clean. An enormous black wolf came over the fence without touching it, and this time there was something alive in his jaws, held so gently its ears didn't even fold. He crossed the yard and sat down in her lap, with tremendous ceremony, one indignant, entirely unharmed brown rabbit. It sat up in her skirts. It began, philosophically, to wash its face. Eloan looked at the rabbit. She looked at the wolf, who had already turned 3 times and collapsed with his great scarred head across her knees, pinning her to the step for the foreseeable future, eyes shut, the low, ruinous purr starting up in his chest like a kettle. "A live one," she said, scratching behind his torn ear. "The foxes are getting sentimental." The purr deepened. The hawk cried once, high up in the last of the light, and on the windowsill above them both, in a cracked boot filled with dirt, the first lavender of the year opened.